Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Debbie Yao. Back to the committee. Councillor Nicole Trenny is not feeling well and has requested another member takes the chair for this meeting. May I have nomination for the chair of the meeting, please?
I, Councillor Joseph Fonso, propose Councillor Ross Melton to be elected chair for this meeting.
I second. And I can second. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? No? Is that agreed? Councillor Melton is elected chair of the meeting. Over to you, Councillor Melton, please.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you, fellow members of the committee. So before we begin, we've got a couple of bits of housekeeping just for everyone. Just a reminder that this meeting will be live streamed via YouTube, so everyone is consenting to be recorded by being here. Welcome. For officers, I'd ask if you could please introduce yourselves at your first time speaking, and councillors, I think we should do the same. And a final one, a reminder, if there is a fire alarm, either continuously or intermittently, we will adjourn the meeting. Officers will direct you towards our assembly point in the road outside on Shortlands Road. Perfect. One final one is just to remind everybody to make use of their microphones. When we're having the Q&A session for members of the public, if you'd be happy to join a stand just on the right here for the microphone. Excellent. Well then, let's make a start. First, apologies for absences. I think Councillor Antonides will be joining us a wee bit later, but other than that, no apologies. Finally, can I ask members of the committee to make any declarations of interest? No? Excellent. Third, can I ask members of the committee to agree the minutes from our previous meeting on the 3rd of January?
Agreed. Agreed.
Now, let's get to the meat of the thing. So first and foremost on the docket, we've got the medium-term financial strategy. I'd like to thank 4 of our officers for joining us to take us through on this. But before we get over to those colleagues, I'd like to invite Councillor Ree as the lead member for finance to give us his introduction.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Councillor Rowan Ree. I'm the Cabinet Member for Finance here in Hammersmith and Fulham. I'd just like to start by thanking everybody who was involved in putting this budget together, from Andre and the whole finance team who've been grappling with the numbers, from my fellow cabinet members and staff in the departments who've been going through their departmental budgets line by line, trying to find savings and efficiencies over the last many months, and looking to find savings and efficiencies again for the 13th time. You know, every year it seems that there's less and less money available for local government to spend, and we need to find more and more savings. And so they've done an excellent job of doing that. But this is remarkable work considering we only got the final figures for the local government financial settlement 2 days before Parliament broke up for Christmas. So while everyone was enjoying their turkey over Christmas time, Andre and the finance team were working hard, poring over their spreadsheets and trying to make sure that we could get the numbers to all add up. It's also the 5th year in a row that we've only had a 1-year local government financial settlement, which makes it much harder for local government officers to plan their budgets ahead of time. So I just wanted to make sure that my thanks were on the record for all the great work that they've been doing there. And I think it is really good work. And we put together a budget that I'm very proud of. It's a very difficult time to be setting a budget at the moment. We know that inflation at the moment is at 10.5%. A couple of months ago, it was at over 11%. Interest rates are at 3.5%, and we've got a meeting of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee later this week. I think it's only going to go one way from there. And we read this morning that the IMF have said that Britain is going to be one of the only one of the G7 countries this year that's going to have negative growth. The Bank of England are predicting that we're going to have a recession later this year, possibly the longest one we've had for generations. And that's going to have a huge impact on demand for the council services but also on the costs that the council has to bear. We're also working under incredibly tight financial constraints. Back in 2010, the council received a grant of £164 million from central government. This year, that's only 116 million, a real terms cut of 56%. Now, there aren't many organisations today that are expected to deliver the same services that they were delivering 13 years ago with less than half of the resources. But that's what local government's expected to do at the moment. But here in Hammersmith and Fulham, we're not just doing what we were doing 13 years ago. We're going far further than that. We're delivering more and providing more services for our residents. We've abolished home care charges for those who need support at home. We provide free breakfasts for primary school children in the borough. We've managed to maintain weekly bin collections when so many other councils have moved to fortnightly or once every three weeks. We funded a new law enforcement team who will keep our streets safe and clean. And we've introduced our ethical debt collection policy, which means that we don't use bailiffs to collect council tax debt. Now, in setting this budget, our priority has been protecting these key frontline services that our residents rely on so much. And I'm very proud to say that we've been able to do that. Now, these difficult economic conditions that I've been talking about, they don't just apply to councils. They apply very much to the residents who we represent, who we're working for here at the council. We know that people are struggling with the cost of living. We know that prices are going up, bills are going up, food costs more, everything seems to cost more these days. And as a council, we want to try and do our best to protect residents from the cost of living crisis. That's why, despite the funding difficulties that we're facing, we've managed to find nearly £1 million to provide a new ring-fenced fund to support residents through the cost of living crisis. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to introduce this item. I'm going to hand over now to Andre, who's going to talk you through some of the details. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Andre Mark. I'm the council's head of finance for strategic planning and investment. It's going to take everyone through a few slides, really outlining the budget for 23-24, and just talking a few bits as to how we came about that strategy, and then also outlining the kind of the medium term in terms of what that picture looks like. So just wait for the slides to come up. Next slide, please. So, like I said, just going to touching on our strategic operating environment that we're in, touching a lot on what Councillor Ree focused on, then looking at the proposed strategy and the budget that we've actually set, and then looking again, like I said, in the medium term for 24, 25 and beyond. So next slide, please. So in terms of the strategic operating environment, I think Councillor Ree's touched on a lot of the socio-economic factors, certainly on a national scale. But it's important really to touch on a few of the local ones as well. So demographic changes being one of the biggest ones. So seeing a lot of the age changes within the council, particularly older demographic as well. And that places a particular strain on the council in terms of services as well, in terms of providing those services and ensuring that the needs of those older residents are met. We've seen a lot of regeneration, a lot of major regeneration programs taking place within the council, Education City, within White City, the Civic Campus being but two, alongside some other key strategic investment and regeneration plans around homes and maintaining homes and ensuring that they are fit for purpose for the residents of the council. We also see pressures on a lot of services as well. So home care being one, and the school transport as well being another one as well, amongst many other pressures that are faced by services. Next slide, please. So in terms of the strategy, in terms of setting the budget, we look to align the strategy with the strategic aims of the council. So that would be preserving frontline services, which are valued by residents, ensuring the continued delivery of those key priorities that are in place, increasing investment in services, and I'll touch on the investment later on, and ensuring that the council has a good level for financial resilience for any shocks to come. And so touching on the key principles which kind of underpin the budget for 23-24, first and foremost, looking at inflation, we set aside a provision of 5% for pay and price inflation, And that while that might seem on a slightly modest side, given some of the issues that have been outlined in terms of the economic environment, it's important to note that that 5% is obviously set in a wider context of contracts that are going to be renewed in the medium term as well. So it tries to address as much as possible, and officers work very hard across all the services to try and mitigate the impact of inflation across all services as much as possible. Investment in delivery of council priorities. So again, I'll touch upon that in a moment in a later slide. Looking at council tax, and again, I'll touch upon the principles around council tax, being 3% for the Hammersmith and Fulham element and 2% for what's known as the social care precept. The revenue grant settlement, again, as Councillor Reid remarked upon, we receive a notification of that quite late, and that gives us an indication of the council's general grant funding that it will receive. And some savings, relatively modest savings. And again, I'll touch upon the savings and outline what they are in terms of the budget. And like I mentioned, the cost of planned borrowing, so going towards the regeneration programs that have been outlined as part of the capital program, and maintaining resilience just to ensure that any future shocks or things that come about which we're unaware of or catch us off guard, particularly from a national context, can be dealt with assuredly. So in terms of council tax considerations, it's important to put into context that Hammersmith and Fulham is one of the lowest nationally, I believe the third lowest within London and maybe within the country, in terms of the average bandy that a resident pays. And therefore a 1% change within council tax roughly has the impact of about £8.30 per annum per household for those who pay council tax. We have an estimated 93,000 households within the council who do pay council tax, or who are liable to pay council tax, but due to the council tax support scheme, just over half of those are only expected to pay in full, with 47% receive discounts of various levels depending on their eligibility. And it's important to note, in terms of, as I was mentioning about the key principles for the budget, that in terms of the local government finance settlement, it was expected that all councils would levy a 4.9 or 5% rise in council tax, outlined as 2% on the adult social care precept and 3% for each council or each local authority's element of their council tax. So in terms of a summary of the overall revenue budget position, as you can see on the screen and the slides, we've got a number of different elements. As I mentioned, pay and price inflation being roughly about £14 million within the overall budget context. Investment in services are nearly £11 million, and we'll get onto the detail of some of those, as well as the savings. Nearly £1 million, as mentioned, towards a fund towards cost of living to address some of those emerging pressures around there. And then some additional costs, some around our additional cost of borrowing as interest rates continue to rise and have an impact on our investment. And just about the only good thing that's come out of interest rates rising over the last year or so has been the ability to use some of our balances that we hold and to be able to invest those smartly. So our treasury team and our treasury management strategy sets out kind of what our goals and aims are around that. And we're confident in being able to set a budget or have some investment of about £5 million towards that from our cash balances for next year. In terms of the savings proposal, so again, the number, the 2.9 million may seem modest, but is within a context over the last 5 years of nearly £40 million of savings being delivered by the council. So some of the key ones there, so around efficiencies around commissioning in children's services, greater use of digital technologies within social care, and improving hospital discharge as well within social care. So those are some of the key savings which are being proposed for the budget for next year. Next slide, please. And in terms of investment, so as mentioned, near £10.7 million of investment is in the budget for 23-24. The biggest majority of this is to do with social care, looking to address the pressures around hostile discharges and the increase in demography, as mentioned. An older population means that we have increasing demands, particularly in our adult social care services. So looking to invest in that to meet those. I should also note investment of nearly £2 million in waste collection. And I believe the new contract for the waste went live yesterday, if that is correct. So that just addresses that. And then also looking for food provision within schools. So around free breakfast for primaries and also lunches for secondary schools. Next slide, please. And in terms of financial resilience, so as mentioned, as a council, in terms of our financial strategy, we look to take an approach where we keep an adequate level of reserves, particularly where we may face economic shock. And in terms of our reserves balances, the council is fairly comparable to other London authorities when it comes to its reserves position. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance, CIPFA, do recommend that authorities keep a minimum level of general balance. Again, this is just to weather any shocks. And for Hammersmith, it's roughly in the region of about 19 to 25 million, which we are comfortably in and maintain a balance of. And we also hold earmarked reserves, which are held specifically for particular uses, which are outlined. And are spent in those orders. So one being, for instance, the IT upgrade and refresh of devices and our network as well. Next, please. And so looking forward to the medium term, so looking at 24, 25 and beyond, the strategy still outlines a difficult operating environment that we'll be in. The OBRs outlined that they forecast inflation to be around 7.4% for this calendar year. And as mentioned by Councillor Reid, the inflation level at the moment is still in double digits. So while we are hoping that this will reduce over time, it's still going to prove quite difficult in terms of those price and pay pressures. In terms of the provision that we set aside, so in 24-25, we are hoping that inflation will come down significantly, that a 3% provision will be sufficient, and then 2% thereafter. Obviously with mitigations as well to try and hold those in place. In terms of the demographic pressures, we're still seeing a rise, particularly, like I said, in the older demographic within residents. And we know that's a particular challenge that we'll need to address as part of the medium-term picture. And in terms of the budget gap at this time, we're looking at roughly about £17 million in terms of the budget gap in 24-25 that we will need to address as part of that strategy. And just finally, just in terms of next steps, so we've gone to, I think at this stage, 5 committees or 6 committees at this stage outlining the various bits of the budget. And then on to Cabinet next week, and then finally on to full council for ratification later on in February. So that just gives an outline as to the next steps on the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. Very comprehensive. Before we move on to our next report from Bram, I can see he's raring to go. Keen to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to. Can you hear me? No? Is it any better? Lovely. Before we move on to Bram, keen to give everyone the opportunity to ask any queries on that very detailed report. First, I'm going to invite councillors in the room, then councillors joining us remotely, and then members of the public. So,
I don't have any questions.
no?
I would just like to thank you very much. Very clear and helpful presentation. It's obviously been a very challenging task.
Councillor Traheri?
Yeah, I echo Councillor Jane's remarks that it's an excellent presentation. Thank you. And considering all the difficulties, they've done a really, really great job. Thank you.
Well, I'm not surprised it's got to be so slick after presenting it 6 times already. And I'm sure it will only improve. And also to invite members of the public as well. If you would like to ask a question, if you could join us down here on my right, your stage, no, your left, and use the microphone. Are there any? Yes, please do join us. If you could mention your name first and then your query, please.
So my name's Caroline Kelly, and I am a resident in Hammersmith and Fulham, and I'm born and bred in Hammersmith and Fulham. So I've got two questions. It's a two-part question. So I'm confused as to why that now my background's finance, so I understand finance very well. I'm a little bit confused as to why this panel, the climate change panel, exists. And also, I'm a little bit confused as to why it's just sprung up out of nowhere. Because in last year's notices of committee meetings, I didn't see it on there. So is the panel aware that the military have confirmed that they're going to take control of the weather by 2025? Because that's my research. So therefore, I'm confused as to why this panel exists. I'm confused as to why this panel exists, the climate change panel, because the military have confirmed that they're going to have total control of the weather by 2025. So I'd like to get more involved and understand.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So this is one of several committees that we have that scrutinise the policy work that the council puts out. This obviously covers our climate and ecology work, which the council is doing an awful lot of across the piece. There are also similar committees looking at our work on public health, looking at our work on children's services and education, and all manner of policy areas. So that's what the committee's for. The committees were reformed after May when we had our annual general meeting, just to make sure that we were covering the full range of council services. I think this meeting specifically to look at, or this section is specifically to look at the revenue budget. So I'm not sure I can answer about the military and their role in the weather, but hopefully that provides you some information about why the committee is here.
So what you're telling me is that you don't have any clue about this military taking control of the weather by 2025. Is that right? I can send that research to the panel.
And that's certainly not in my area as the cabinet member for finance in Hammersmith and Fulham there.
Well, it does seem like a waste of money if the military are going to control the weather. So my interest is finance.
I'd be happy to look at anything you want to send me.
Yep. So I'll send you the research as well.
We'd be very grateful to receive it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Any further contributions? Lovely.
Sorry, my name's Helen Dell. I'm also working with the council as a climate change commissioner for the borough. It's just a very small question, but I noticed you had a line in your summary of the budget of an increase in the cost of an additional cost of borrowing, and I was just wondering what that was related to.
So as we look to invest more, so it more relates to capital as opposed to revenue, but when we borrow or use our capital investment to like as outlined in terms of the major regeneration programs, it comes at a cost to revenue. So in accounting terms, you have to
so is that because the cost of borrowing has gone up, or and rather than you haven't substantially increased your borrowing?
So the cost of borrowing, it's substantially got up.
I understand. That's really helpful clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. So can I now invite Bram, if you wouldn't mind introducing the next item?
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a few slides to highlight the budget for the Environment Department. Wait for those to load up. Thank you, Chair. My name's Bram Kantz. I'm the Strategic Director of Environment, and I'm going to take you through some of the highlights of the revenue budget for 23-24 for the Environment Department. Next slide. Yeah, this slide basically highlights the breadth of services that the Environment Department covers, and also levels of transactions, volumes, etc., to give you an idea of how the money is actually spent. So there's over 5 million waste and recycling collections. There's over 12,000 noise and nuisance complaints. We've got 4 leisure centres, 53 parks and open spaces. We've got over 19,000 miles of streets are swept. Over 300,000 books are actually issued. And then we've got over 138,000 e-books, 120,000 council tax cases managed, over 16,000 street works inspections, 187 for contact calls taken, 90 million pounds worth of council tax collected, and 180 million business rates collected. There's 25,000 trees, 240 kilometres of roads, 230 hectares of green space, and obviously there's the climate change unit itself and the work we're doing. We've got over 2,500 electric vehicle charging points, and we've got 194,000 benefit applications processed. This is by all means not all the services, but it gives you a flavour of some of the stuff that's covered within the Environment Department. Next slide. This slide deals with some of the recent achievements. So the first achievement I've got there is we've made an investment of £4.7 million in the law enforcement team, stroke gangs team, to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour at no extra cost to the residents. We managed to secure £2.2 million per annum from secure developer contributions. We've had an award-winning scheme in the traffic congestion pollution reduction scheme in South Fulham that won the LGC Awards Future Places winner in 21. Our climate change net zero plan was independently rated the best in London. Leading the way on electric charging points, we've had a record grant of 4.2 from the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles. We're providing the cost of living response and support, paid out 9 million in energy related grants and 13 million in retail relief. We've got the Resident Experience and Access Programme, improving residents' access to key council services whilst projecting to save in the order of £800,000 a year. We've got challenging services delivery models and budgets. We've got £67,000 of underspend in last year, and generally significant commercial incomes of about 12 million we need to actually bring in. We've also been awarded 5th place in parks for London, and that's up from 27th place. Next slide. This slide shows how the Environment Department budget is spent across the different services. You can see that we're spending around about £100 million worth of expenditure, and we've got about £30 million worth of projected income to make the balances work. Next slide. Additional investment in the new waste and street cleansing contract of £1.7 million. That protects the current service standards, including at least weekly waste collections, and it also allows for additional new services such as food waste collections, inflationary pressures and growth in the number of properties in the borough. We're also allowing for additional 5% investment for inflationary increases on both major contracts and council staff pay. We've done a thorough review of fees and charges to generate increased income in the order of £133,000, generally inflationary uplift, alignment with other boroughs, and also full cost recovery. We've got sustained reduction on waste disposal tonnages and continuation of discounted rate for processing recycling, which has given us another £150,000 budgetary saving. Next slide. This slide basically deals with some of the pressures that we're going to be facing in the future. So we've got significant funding requirements for addressing climate and ecological emergency. We've got Hammersmith bridge works, which have been undertaken at risk pending confirmation of funding contributions from the Department of Transport and TfL. We've got provisional waste collection services not yet agreed as part of the new contract, required to meet our business plan objective of 40% recycling. We've got significant national inflationary pressures impacting on service spend, i.e. e.g. energy, fuel and current service contracts. We've got potential national public finance pressures impacting on specific grants funded by services. And the best example is TfL. continuous pressures on services and income due to the cost of living, £12 million worth of commercial income target, and increasing energy costs. Lastly, we've got ongoing pressure and challenges to secure funding for the corporate business plan objectives, which we continue to secure. I think that's the last slide. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bram. As before, I'd like to invite members of the committee if they have any questions, first and foremost, in the room, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can I just ask you on your slide 2, you talk about 301,000 in books. Could you just 301,000 books issued? Could you just clarify what you're referring to there?
This is in terms of the libraries. So the
Library services.
Yeah. Apologies for that. That should have had the word library books in there. So yeah, we're not giving away free books. No,
Just wanted to clarify what that was. And also, you were talking about later on in food waste collections, which I think you've previously told this committee are being rolled out area by area. Is there an update on where we are with that?
No, as Andre said, we've got the new waste contract started on Monday. So that includes food waste collections. So we're in communications with the new contractor to work out a timescale, and then we'll bring that back. And when we've got a timescale, because it will require the contractor implementing the necessary systems in place and also securing the vehicles, etc., before we could actually do it.
But it's now in train, which is...
It is part of the new contract, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Those were my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your report. My first question, looking at paragraph 41, parking account budget, you guys are projected to make a profit of 31.6 million. How much of that is related to traffic fines?
Thank you very much. I haven't actually got the breakdown of that detail, but I can actually get that for you. So
that would be very helpful. Thank you. Just a few more questions. In paragraph 38, it says you guys are currently making a loss of 6.2 million when it comes to leisure, sport and culture. Surely this is an area that is open to commercialization. Are you guys looking into any ventures to get that in the green, be it through renting of tennis pitches and others?
Yeah, Kelly will answer that. Yeah, thanks.
Hello, I'm Kelly Gooch, Head of Finance for the Environment Department. So what you can see in the paper is the total gross budget for the whole service area. So that includes things like our overheads, all our staffing, that kind of thing. The leisure contract that we currently have that provides our leisure services across all of our leisure centres, all 4 of them, is a net income generating contract. So it has been that way for several years now. So that is actually provided at no cost and in fact at a return to the council. Thank you.
Moving on, just one more question. With regards to Hammersmith Bridge, it was astutely pointed out that the works are being conducted at risk. May I ask why a funding agreement still hasn't been agreed after so many years with regional and national government, when I understand one has been put in place for the whole work?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. What we mean when we say we're doing the works at risk is that we're not waiting for government or TfL to give us the money, because we're in the process of submitting an outline business case, and that process will get approved. But what the council has decided to do, so that there's no delay in actually progressing the works and getting the bridge open to traffic again, Hammersmith Fulham has actually incurred substantial expenditure to actually make sure that we do it as quickly as possible. So, and that's the thinking behind that. So, yeah.
One from me, if you don't mind, Bram. I'm extremely interested in waste collections, and keen if you could tell us a little bit more about your anticipated reduction in tonnage. Is that due to a public information campaign? And if so, can you tell us a bit more detail?
Thank you very much for that, Chair. Generally, we've got low waste, residual waste figures for the borough anyway. And I think there were some changes as a result of the pandemic, and also, but we have seen trends, and the trends over time have actually led to the figure be improving, and that's resulting in us actually paying less for disposal. But the other thing that you'll say is every ton we actually take away from the residual waste and move it to recycling, that also improves our disposal cost. If that makes sense, yeah.
Understood. So if I've understood you correctly, there was a bit of a spike during the pandemic, and we're seeing a reduction down to BAU.
I think there was more waste coming in during the pandemic, but that's just coming back down again. But overall general trends over a longer period of time, there is a general slight reduction, what we know, or that's what we're modelling and projecting. It's very difficult to work out exactly, but we feel with the modelling work that we've done, we can project that, and that is within a reasonable figure to actually claim from that budget. Yeah.
And that's reflective of a sort of national trend that can be observed.
As far as I'm aware, this figure is sort of like, there are figures similar in the London region. So I'm familiar with the West London Waste Authority, etc. But I wouldn't be certain whether it was actually a trend across the whole country. But generally we watch it. This is a very minor figure. It sounds like a lot, but in the context of the waste disposal budget, it's a relatively small reduction. So
thanks for taking me through that. Very interesting. Any more questions? No. Councillor Trujillo?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the climate team have been incredible putting this together, and all the projects, as well as on top of all of these things that they're talking about for you know, limited resource as always. So I'd like to congratulate them.
I'm sure we would all echo that on the committee, and then open up to the floor. Perhaps we can take the gentleman with the scarf first, just as he has not had an opportunity to ask a question yet.
Just a couple of questions. Can I follow up the councillor's request for a bit more detail on parking income breakdown? So in other words, not just how much is due to parking fines, but also how much is due to rental payments, normal parking, income parking. A bit more detail of that. Would that be published?
yes, yes, through you, Chair. The actual parking account figures are published on an annual basis anyway, so I can provide that information. It's not a problem, but it is available and it's published. So you should be able to find it on the website. So on the Hammersmith Fulham website. So yeah.
My other question is about bicycle.
Yeah, so generally the bicycle hangars you're referring to, or cycle parking arrangements, they're normally funded out of capital, so they wouldn't come out of revenue. So when they're out of the capital expenditure, what we try and do is whenever we try and secure as much money as possible. So whenever we secure some money, we actually progress those out across the borough. And I can't remember how much, but we've actually been continuing to invest, not as much as I would like, but we have been continuing to invest, but it actually comes out of capital rather than revenue. So the company that manages it for them, they get the revenue, not the council. So as from memory, unless Kelly, you're familiar with? No, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I know that some councils have taken ownership of the cycle hangars and they manage it themselves, and they do get a small revenue for that. But in the arrangement that we've got with the company that provides these cycle hangars, or cycle loops, they're called, they actually manage the service, manage who gets the, and also they get the money from the residents for providing that service. So there's in a way there's very little involvement of the council. So. I'll need to look that up and send you those details if you can provide the clerk with your name, then I can send you the details. Yeah.
Thank you, Wilf. Do you mind if we ask this lady, just as she's not had a chance to ask a question?
Thank you. I'm Pat Tukey. I was one of the resident commissioners on the Climate and Ecological Emergency Commission, and I'm a long-term resident of Hammersmith and Fulham. I really have a lot of sympathy with the council for the budget and for the bind that you're in, and for the fact that you're putting up the council tax. And clearly times are very hard. But what I can't quite see is how the budget proposals that we've heard, which are, by obviously very general, where in them there is the incredibly enormous investment that the council is going to have to make into decarbonisation if it's going to meet its target of net carbon zero by 2030. The climate emergency was declared in this borough to great fanfare in 2019. We're in the 4th year now on the way to 2030. That's 4 out of 11 years. Have we decarbonised at all? Do we know what the measures are? What are the steps along the pathway? What is this committee doing to making sure that all the different elements of the council are working towards this really important facet of what the council has to do? I hear the good things that you're doing, but a lot of the time it's saying we have put in a low traffic neighbourhood. We have done the King Street cycle lane. We have the food waste pilot. That's been a pilot that's been going on since 2020, I think, and covers only 4,500 households in the borough. When is it going to be rolled out to the rest of the borough? I know you said that it's part of the new contract that's being negotiated, but you're already getting rid of that for the food waste from the 4,500 households. At what point are the plans going to be made to collect it from the 100 and however many thousands of households in the borough there are that are not yet covered? What about, there are big projects that the council has to be working on in order to reach this net zero target, like your retrofitting of public housing. I know you've got some really excellent pilot schemes on that, but how are they going? And when are you going to roll out retrofitting to all the council's social housing? Because that's of enormous importance. And how are you going to support private landlords, if you like, and also private homeowners to do the retrofitting in their own properties? I know, again, you've got some very small scale projects going on, and they're great for publicity, but they're not getting us towards net carbon zero in 2030. And I just really don't feel that this has the high priority that the council needs to have to make that happen. I don't believe it's going to happen. And I would really like it if this committee expected to be able to and committed to telling us where we are along that pathway at very regular intervals with a time frame for when we make the big steps that need to be taken. I implore you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tukey. I'm happy to come in and to answer that. So firstly, this is a revenue budget, not a capital budget. So lots of the measures that you spoke about, lots of the investments, the longer term investments, that's capital investment rather than revenue. This is day-to-day spending. So the big projects that are going to make a real difference, they're more capital projects. You're absolutely right to mention the council's housing stock. 75% of carbon emissions, I believe, are related to our housing stock. And we have huge investment as part of our housing revenue account, which is looking to introduce retrofitting and to try and make our council stock more energy efficient and to decarbonise it. So that work is going on. It's just not in this report because this is related to revenue spending. There is a separate climate financing strategy which is being put together, which again is part of a separate report rather than the day-to-day council revenue budget. But yeah, I can reassure you that the council is absolutely committed to hitting this 2030 target. We're keen to be, I think we are. I think we've got very good green credentials. I think we can describe ourselves as being Britain's greenest borough. We we've got the best climate emergency plan in London, and that's not us saying that. That's an independent body who've said that. We've got the highest concentration of electric vehicle charging points in the country here in Hammersmith and Fulham. We've got the largest concentration of air quality monitors in the whole of Europe here in this borough. Right, we are committed to this. Climate change is the biggest issue facing not just our borough, not just our country, but our planet. And this council is determined to make a difference and do our bit, because that's what residents expect and that's what residents deserve.
Just wanted to say thank you, Pat, for the question, and to reassure you that this committee is just as committed as you are to holding the council to account, and very much appreciate your contribution and all the contributions from the members of the public to hold our feet to the fire as well. Thank you.
Can I just say 2 more sentences?
Of course.
Really brief. It's great that you've got the greatest plan ever, and that, it's the best plan. It's been rated as one of the best plans. But what we really need to see is how it's being rated in terms of delivery. That's what we need to see. So that's what I'm pleading for, is that you show us how you're delivering on that excellent plan, with the timelines, with the progress that is being made, with the estimates of how far we have got towards decarbonising as soon as possible.
Thanks, Pat. And I can assure you that future sessions of the committee are going to be looking at precisely that. And I'd really be grateful if you could join us for those. Thank you. You've been waiting very patiently.
Sorry, I'm not researched on this, but also waste management. I've been paying a little bit of attention to waste management. I didn't realise it would come up tonight, so I haven't brought anything with me. But why do we pay for waste management? Because they're making, I understand, from my understanding, from what I'm looking at, they make a lot of profit in turning our waste into energy and fuel, don't they? You would know more.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Well, there's 2 elements of waste which actually cost money. The first one is the collection element, which is what we're responsible for, and our contractor takes responsibility for that, i.e. collecting it from your doorstep to the depot, to the waste transfer depot. And then there's the disposal cost, and there's different ways of disposing of the waste.
I know a little bit about waste disposal.
Yeah. So you're right. When you sometimes, you could burn the waste and you get energy from waste, etc., as part of that process, or it might go to landfill, it might be anaerobic digestion. It could be, there are a number of treatments that but the actual process of managing that volume of waste in terms of tonnages still cost money. And yes, but there are elements of the process which actually give you a return. You're right to say that.
So what is the name? Which company do we and if you do you look at their profits, the profits that they're making? Because the profits that I'm looking at are astronomical, billions of pounds. They're the profits that I'm looking at.
There's 2 sides to the equation. The waste collection is purely Hammersmith and Fulham's responsibility, and we engage with a contractor to do that. In terms of our disposal, we're part of a Western Riverside Waste Authority, which is made up of 4 constituent London boroughs, and they manage the waste disposal process for that, and they manage the contractors in relation to that as well.
So do you have any involvement? Because obviously you will always be negotiating contracts that are in the interests of the public, won't you?
The collections ones we do, we've just been out to the market and tendered that contract. The waste disposal ones are dealt with by the Western Riverside Waste Authority, which is effectively the waste disposal authority on behalf of us. So we don't do that. But we do pay towards that service. Yeah.
So is there nobody in the council that is actually looking at the amount of money we're paying them and the amount of money they're making out of us?
We are, Councillor Harcourt's the chair of the committee that's responsible for the Western Riverside Waste Authority.
Well, the Western Riverside Waste Authority is the disposal authority as opposed to the collection authority.
Yes.
Getting the terminology correct. And there's obviously a cost of, I don't know if you've ever been down to Smuggler's Wharf in Wandsworth, where all the rubbish goes to. It's well worth a visit, because people often talk about waste collection and recycling, and lots of people don't believe that actually happens. It's really good to go down there and just see how the various items are separated out, how aluminium cans are separated out from ones that are steel or iron or whatever. Different types of plastics are separated out to paper and so on, bundled up. And that is the paper is sold and recycled, but obviously that's dependent on very much on market conditions and the value. And at one point last year, we were actually paying to get rid of the recycled paper because the value had dropped so much. On other occasions, it's slightly more. The same applies with the waste. Obviously, there's a cost of ferrying the waste from Smugglers Wharf and Kringle Dock down to Belvedere, where the energy from waste plant is, which is what you're talking about, generating electricity. Now, that's subject to a number of things, and the government is just about to introduce an electric generation levy or something like that, where they will be taking a large proportion of the profits back from that. So yes, we do, but that's subject to a contract, and that contract specifies that depending on the value of the electricity being generated, and that obviously fluctuates again, and at the moment the prices are quite high. Previous years they haven't been, and if we fall in below that, then we actually end up paying money to the company. And if it's above that, then yes, we make a small amount of profit, and that's used to offset the amount of money that is levied from this council to Western Riverside Waste Authority for part of the disposal. I hope that makes sense.
So are they making how much profit are they making out of us? They seem to be making the waste disposal, if they're making billions of pounds in profits.
Sorry, who are you? Can you perhaps you could tell me who you?
I'm not researched. I have just started researching it, and I just heard it come up, so I just wanted to ask some questions.
I mean, obviously, the company that finally disposes of this, but the energy from waste plant down in Belvedere is a company called Corey, and there's a contract with them. It was a contract that was signed, God knows, 2002, I think it was, a 30-year contract. And so there's limitations placed within that. We're looking at the moment of at having to re-procure that and looking at the future, the costs and such like. Obviously, they are in it to make a profit. Western Riverside Waste Authority is not there to make a profit. It's a statutory body set up by Parliament, much the same as councils are and so on. And it's obviously it has reserves because for contingency purposes, but it's not there to make a profit.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That's very reassuring to hear that the council is so well networked and expert in these issues. Can I invite any further questions from the public? Excellent. Then, if I can ask members if they note the report. Thank you. And a particular thank you to our four officials from the Finance Department and Environment Departments for taking us through that in such detail. Of course, please do.
In order to meet your gap of 17 million and also to help with the carbon footprint, is anyone researching how going plant-based throughout the Hammersmith and Fulham could save money and improve your carbon footprint? For example, I don't know, I'm not sure if you do school meals and things like that, and whether you have any staff restaurants or meetings where you have food. I know that schools can save about 6% of their food budget by going vegan, and some schools have gone vegan because of various horse meat and contamination in the meat. So it's kind of helped them avoid those kind of problems.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, yes, you're right. A plant-based diet does help towards the carbon footprint as part of that process. And we're always looking at every opportunity to actually do that. And that is one of the things that we will have in the chain of things that we need to look at, et cetera, to actually get us to net carbon zero by 2030.
Great. Who would I write to about that?
You can write to myself, or you can write to Hinesh Mehta, so we can take that forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, shall we press on to our fifth item, which is climate education in Hammersmith. I'd particularly like to thank our three officials for joining on this one, and particularly Jan, as I understand you're not obligated to join us on this one, but can bring a bit of a historic perspective. But Peter, do you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I joined the council in June, and our kind of climate education programme has been running for a kind of period of time before that, which is why it's very helpful that Jan is here to provide some sort of specific details, etc. But I'm going to pass over to Georgina Herry, who's our lead for school effectiveness, and is leading the team that is working on this particular area at the moment.
Thank you. So thank you to all here for inviting us to talk about the work that we're doing in school improvement on climate education. My name is Georgina Herry. I lead school improvement across Hammersmith and Fulham. I obviously have Peter Haylock, who is my line manager, the Director of Education, which shows how high within our service climate education is. And to my left, Jan Parnell is supporting school improvement with regards to the climate education and the industrial strategy. And my presentation today is actually structured in 3 parts, and I'll just wait for the slides to come up. I'm going to start by talking about why climate education is such a key tenet within our team. I shall move on to sort of give a summary of the work that we've done to date over the last 3 years. And then I will end the presentation by giving an update and talking about the peer, which is an element of our work. So climate is a key tenet of the council's values, and we are endeavouring to support this by ensuring that we offer a climate education strand to our work. We do recognise within the team that children and young people are key stakeholders of this work, and in our approach to climate strategy, they will be key decision makers within the future. As such, within the team, we offer a range of climate projects, guidance and activities developed with local schools within the local area, voluntary organisations, businesses and residents. And the idea of working with these partners is to ensure that we inspire and inform our young people, their families, and our practitioners working within schools. In addition, climate education is a key tenet of our work because the DfE has recently published some guidance which outlined the approach to climate education in the future. So we know that teaching and learning, supporting sustainability leadership, a focus on courses that will be available in the future are all going to be key to the work around climate education. And we want to ensure as a school improvement team in Hammersmith and Fulham that we've given our schools the tools that they will need in order to respond in the future. This slide gives a focus on climate education and the work that we're doing with our primary schools. So we do have good engagement, although we recognise there's still more to do. Over the last 3 years, we've worked considerably with quite a number of partners, including hosting a virtual climate challenge, which was held with our primary schools, where they had the opportunity to present their ideas on sustainability. We have a long-standing Children's Environmental Parliament, which has been running for the past 20 years, and it enables our Year 6 pupils to work with their peers and present their ideas on environmental issues. We've worked with schools on accreditations and supporting them in regards to the awards that they're aiming to achieve. We've got quite a number of schools that through their participation in the work that they've done within the schools have managed to achieve quite a few accreditations. We also have the Mudlarks project, which is an environmental project working with children in the primary sector. It's been running for the past 5 years and has actually garnered some recognition for that work, which we're really pleased about. And the outcomes included a mini sewer, an artistic response on thinking globally and acting locally, and some school recycling initiatives. And I'm pleased to say that we'll be running Mudlarks again this year. So we have the Thames Music Makers, another key project, which is in terms of working with the English Chamber Orchestra. Again, a high-profile project allowed us to work with our partners and stakeholders, but it just raised the profile of climate education within our local area. And we also, as a school improvement team, run a series of networks. They take place termly. We have a primary network and a secondary network. We also do some cross-phase work, and that gives us an opportunity to work quite closely with our school partners, to share practice, to share ideas. And it's always quite influential when schools are motivating each other with regards to the work that they do. Next slide, please. So this just gives a bit more information about the Thames Music Makers. There's a partnership between Urban Wise, the English Chamber Orchestra, and Riverside Studios. It was a number of schools in the borough, so 6, who were brought together to work on some climate and ecology workshops. Next slide, please. With regard to our secondary schools, again, this just gives a bit of an outline with regard to some of the work of the Climate Education Network and also some of the accreditations that schools are working towards. Within the secondary sector, we've got some schools that are really taking the climate education agenda by the, let's say, by the teeth, really. And what they're doing is ensuring that as a whole school, they're responding and working on the climate education as a whole. And there's certainly champions within our local area. Next slide, please. So the school improvement team have worked with partners to ensure that we have a primary climate education guide. And this is currently on the Learning Partnership website and is linked, and schools can access that. And it covers a range of information, useful links, resources, and it's a valuable tool for our schools to access. It also covers some information on outdoor learning and forest schools. We also are in the process of developing a secondary climate education guide, so working with our secondary partners so they too can access a range of resources and links within the local area and beyond. Next slide, please. Okay, children's a key implementer of summer in the city, and we've made sure in school improvement that we've contributed towards that. So as a school improvement team, we ran a series of events and ecology workshops, and we had great attendance and we were able to work with children and families, which contributes to our aim of being able to inspire and support families within this key area. Next slide, please. So moving on to next steps, we still recognise that there's more work to do. We're not a team that rests on our laurels, and we understand the importance of this work. And within our next steps, we are members of the school improvement team with external support are working with an advisory board on activities that can be delivered via the PEER. The PEER is a climate education and wellbeing centre based on Fulham Wharf. And although it's not yet open, we're hoping to launch towards the end of this year. There'll be a range of programmes that we'll seek to run from the PEER, including intergeneration programmes with an environmental and climate focus, CPD for teachers within the wider community, and a range of other activities that, with the support of the volunteers and the advisory board, they're working on what that programme can look like. Next slide, please. Just to say, we've got a key timeline in place with regard to the partners that we're working with, the accreditations that we'll be supporting schools with, and also the timeline with regards to the activities that are due to run. Next slide, please. This just gives an understanding of the project timeline. As much as possible, we'll try to keep to those times and dates. There's always delays that might come up within the process, but this is the current outline with regards to what the project will look like. I just want to stress that our work on climate education is not limited to a building. It's far beyond that with regard to, the work that we do with our networks, the work that we do with our practitioners, and these encouragement we give to our schools to share ideas and to share practice. So although we look forward to the PEER, and that's an exciting piece within the where next and the next steps, there's still quite a bit of work to do with our schools in the meantime, including an audit to understand fully what the schools are doing with regards to their climate education practice, and ensuring that we're co-producing what the next steps will be with regards to the strategic plan. So we tend to work on terms and academic years. So we're starting that process now so that we're ready for September. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgina, for a very comprehensive overview. I've got a few questions, but I'd like to invite my fellow councillors if they had wanted to raise any first. No? Jose?
Thank you for that presentation. On behalf of the opposition, can I just say, I think it's a phenomenal piece of work you're doing. We very much support climate education, and I look forward to seeing more of what comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alfonso. So, Georgina, first I'd like to ask you a few questions about the coverage. So you were very, it was very helpful to you of you to highlight the 32 primary schools engaged and 7 secondary schools engaged. Could you give us an indication of what percentage that covers of the schools within the borough?
Yes, so within our secondary schools, it's just over 50%. With regards to our primary schools, it's sitting within the 90s, but there's still some more work to do. I think with the audit that we're sending out, that will give us a better understanding, because actually when schools think of climate education, there's a range of areas that they cover. So once that's gone out and come back, we'll have a really good understanding of what the schools are doing with regards to activities. And I anticipate those numbers will change.
That's fantastic to hear. But I'm sorry, Peter.
Just going to say, it's worth remembering that all of our secondary schools are academies, so they don't necessarily need to engage with our own program. They will have their own programs running kind of separately. And one of the key things that we have done as part of our kind of medium-term funding bid for through sort of some work with the children's services team is to try to bring in additional resource to enable us to kind of track that kind of coverage very carefully, so we can report really effectively what our secondary schools, etc., are doing, and that will very much link in to the industrial strategy, etc., and the council's manifesto commitments.
That's really helpful. So I'm really heartened to hear that that you're both putting in more resource and conducting a kind of clear audit, I think was how you phrased it, Georgina. I don't want to kind of second guess what the insights from that audit are, but I would be interested to understand what your feeling is are the current barriers to preventing us to roll out the program to 100%, taking in mind Peter's important point around the engagement with academies.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So in terms of the barriers, I think that obviously the educational landscape at the moment is quite challenging. Schools are still recovering from the pandemic, which is a key aspect of supporting the pupils coming back into school, and the challenges around that. And so I think that there's probably several challenges within the landscape that are possibly proving to take time away from leaders. However, and like I say, we're a team that don't rest on our laurels. We do feel that this is a key area, and the audit will give us a better understanding with regards to what schools are doing and the where next. And certainly peer modelling and champions are a really good way of ensuring that staff and leaders can see the benefits of and how easy it can be, or how we can overcome some of those challenges in schools. So certainly through our networks at primary and secondary level, we're ensuring that we are using them as case studies and highlighting the work that's being done in order to facilitate more engagement.
That's really helpful, Georgina. So if I mirror back to you, if I've understood that correctly, that the major barrier that you've identified is just challenges within education and limited bandwidth from educators, that they're not able to kind of give this the attention that we'd like?
I believe so. Obviously, that's we won't know for sure, but I believe so. I think it's just been a challenging period of time, and actually, there's there are competing demands, I suppose, on leaders' time, but certainly I think that the case studies and giving schools the opportunity to learn from others certainly will provide some support with regards to engagement.
Sounds like a very sensible strategy. Peter, sorry.
Yeah, so from a secondary perspective, every child will have a really clear education around climate change. So it'll be delivered as part of their geography curriculum, and it'll be delivered as part of their science curriculum. What we're trying to track is that additional work that goes and enhances that by getting them out of school into different activities, etc. I think what Georgina's alluding to, obviously, tomorrow be an example in the teaching profession, is there's significant reduction in funding in real terms, which means that there are significant reduction in number of teaching assistants, for example. So enabling children to get out of school onto additional enhanced activities becomes increasingly more challenging. But the curriculum itself will still be strong. All of our inspections have kind of shown that the kind of curriculum coverage is meeting the national curriculum, etc. But what we're trying to do through the climate education plan through the council is to give the children those enhanced activities that Georgina was talking about before.
That's really helpful context. And again, it just reiterates Councillor Alfonso's point that it's such a worthwhile programme and fully supported by the council and this committee. Another, perhaps a change of tack to look at the peer in a little bit more detail. Just for the benefits of the committee, could you take us through a bit more detail on the planned uses of the peer?
Yeah, so I'll just take that. Jan Parnell here, school improvement consultant. So the peer, actually, we've been working with Riverstone Living, which is a high-end facility in the borough. It's also in a neighbouring borough that provide a sort of holistic approach to looking after older residents. It is a private company, and what they've done is they've actually given us the use of their sales office, which is the peer. And the pier has already been built and it's been used as the sales office. That's now been vacated and it's been refurbished. It is like a sort of glass classroom floating in the Thames, and so the ducks come by and land on the green roof, and various sort of riverboats come past. So it's a very inspiring place for young people and older people to learn together and to learn separately. We've got it for 6 years. We've got it at a very, very reasonable cost. We do pay some rent, but it is really a peppercorn rent in comparison to what would be a commercial rent. And we've actually got 50% use of it, but we've got mainly daytime use. And Riverstone, who own the building, will be using it more in the evenings as a commercial venture and at weekends, you know. So we have got really generous use of it during the week. What we'd really like to do is to develop our intergenerational programs, because we feel this is really important. And I know that's a value within the council. So we're hoping then to work with older residents who can share their wisdom and experience, and younger students, but also younger residents living nearby, so that we can develop some arts programs, some debating societies, some music programs with an environmental theme. We also hope to attract some inward investment. So, for example, some of our anchor institutions, when they have their sustainability day or they're writing up their policies around sustainability and community engagement, they could come and use the pier and pay us some rental income for that, which will then subsidise some of the programmes that Georgina outlined. As I say, we've had an environmental parliament with our community groups for over 20 years. That is really land breaking. You know, it's not a recent thing. We're building on what has happened in Hammersmith and Fulham. And as some of the residents were saying, we want to accelerate that together. So the pier is a building that's inspiring, that will have an environmental focus. It'll have an intergenerational focus. But it's the work that's going with families and with children on the ground in our schools that really makes a massive difference. Also, the Parks Department here, you know, been very supportive in terms of the summer programs that we've been running and some of the holiday activities as well. So our parks and open spaces are very much our green classrooms, and so many schools are, you know, growing their own vegetables, showing children, you know, how to do that. It might sound like a small thing, but to learn where your food comes from. And that's right through into secondary. Of course, we've got the Phoenix Farm, we've got Hammersmith Academy that has a dedicated space. But in many of our schools across the sector, that may look very sort of like concrete bound. They're digging up the concrete, they're putting in the growing spaces, and they're building it into the curriculum. And now we just need to continue to sustain and develop that together.
Feel quite inspired, Jan.
Well,
Thank you.
yes, I'll be quiet now, sorry.
So if I've understood correctly, it's going to be a really powerful venue to supercharge some of the fantastic work that's already been done in schools and across the community. Is that?
That's right. And
That
I
good
think
description?
it will attract national attention as well, because it's the first one in the country and possibly in Europe that's dedicated to the environment and to learning and to schools. So I think it's, you know, a real bonus for Hammersmith and Fulham.
Fantastic. Please.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really fantastic. I just wanted to know how you are going to monitor and evaluate the impact of the programme, because building on what we heard earlier, it's really important to see that impact.
Absolutely. And it's something that we've really thought about with regards to the team, and really thought about how can we demonstrate measurable outcomes with regards to the impact that's being had. We certainly have case studies from schools in terms of the work and the impact that's taken place. We've got feedback from pupils with regards to the impact of the work, but there's still more to do in that area. And certainly with the work that's taking place now, we are really honing in on what that impact, how we are able to not only gather that, but also report that back within our governance procedures as well.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about that then as the year progresses.
Hi, and thank you very much. It was very interesting. And as an architect, it's good to see that the building is being reused as a sense, and you're sharing it. I'm all for kind of using resources again and again. So yeah, well done for that. I think that's great. I was going to ask, how can residents get involved with this, and how would you engage them?
So if I start, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues either side. So certainly we're working very closely with the climate unit and with the Climate Alliance. We have a member of the climate team that sits on the volunteer advisory board at the moment, as well as working with residents in terms of the advisory board on the sort of what the programs might look like in the future. So there's certainly already some input from residents. Certainly going forward, our key stakeholders are residents, business partners, so they will be a key element with regards to the work going forward. Do you want to give some more detail, Jan?
Yes, we're setting up a number of workshops, so we would like residents to become engaged with that. And we're particularly keen on thinking of ways in which parents and carers can become involved, because their children are very much the pioneers in coming back and talking about this. And we have seen in other examples in the country and abroad how parents and families have been really harnessed to work collectively on it. So I think it's a really good question, but we've got 2 workshops coming up, which I can give you the dates for, which will be in the next academic year. So that we've got to shape the programme, we've got to open it, and we want some engagement, definitely, in terms of an ongoing relationship with our residents. Co-shaping it also with Riverstone residents who live alongside, if you like. One of them has donated a fabulous piano to the centre, and they're already thinking about things like art classes to do jointly, etc. But we want a wider group of residents to get involved, absolutely.
Just to add to that as well, within school improvement, we're working with our governors. So actually they're a key element with regards to the sort of climate education of schools. Yeah, of schools. They're a key element in terms of the work going forward. And we've already started to garner some inside information about our governors that come with a climate background, whether it's from their work or from their interests. That's been really good as well in terms of informing our steps forward.
Thank you very much. I'm just going back a little bit, and I might have missed something here, but most of your schools that you're engaging with secondary are academies. So have you reached out to non-academy schools as well? I know that you've had some restrictions, but there's not any.
We don't have any all of the secondaries are academies. So the only primary schools that aren't, the only schools that aren't academies are William Morris Sixth Form, which is obviously a very different type of institution, and our maintained primary schools.
Okay, thank you. No, I don't mean non-state. Well, actually, that's a good point. What about non-state schools? Yeah.
Good start. So certainly on the forward plan has been about that we know that there's certainly some interest with regards to our non-state schools, probably both in Hammersmith and Fulham and beyond. So it's certainly something that we're looking at. What we wanted to do is ensure that we really consolidate the work that we're doing in Hammersmith and Fulham first with our maintained sector and our academies before broadening out to wider sectors.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just wanted to just say, just to highlight, is the whole area of green skills as it's known, you know, so all of the new career pathways that are being developed, ones that we don't even envisage yet. So very much working with colleagues in the economy and in the environment is working together to look at, well, what are these different types of opportunities for young people? So we've got a really good careers network, and we're working really closely with the economy department in terms of forecasting where these new jobs will be, and therefore helping to support young people to make the right choices. So things like degree apprenticeships, things like the new engineering courses. We've got local universities who are offering 100% bursaries to look at environmental studies. So I think that's another really key one that works right across the council, across different departments. And that will very much engage the secondary and further education sector.
Thank you very much. Councillor Trujillo.
Yeah, thanks very much for everybody's presentation. Really, I was just going to delve down into two areas, which is resource. What sort of resources will be dedicating to the peer, and the other is how will it effectively work with the schools? How will they engage with the peer? If you could have a bit more detail, that would be great.
So the resourcing is something that we're working on in terms of the business case at the moment. So it's difficult to give you a specific answer on that at the moment. We're clear in terms of what's needed. Obviously, there's a cost element to that in terms of salaries, etc., that we need to work through. Because obviously it's something that can't necessarily cost the council kind of money. So we need to look at that very carefully, and we've got a business case that we're putting together.
Peter, would it be possible to share that as it develops?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, do you want to repeat the second part of the question? Is it how we will engage with schools and the peer?
Yeah, it was really, you know, how I guess how we're going to encourage schools to come. And what this relationship's going to be. I mean, I guess partly Peter's answered it in terms of the resource on the peer, that, you know, but yeah, how we're going to encourage schools to use it.
So I think, again, it's probably, sorry, it's part of, I wasn't clear in the last quick answer. It's probably part of the same business case, because obviously what we need to do is provide some of our services for free where we need to, and look at where we can trade services to get sort of children, etc., involved, and make sure that we involve as many different kind of groups, etc., as possible. But we're looking at a whole plan about how that can be mapped out. The challenge has been exactly when the kind of opening date will be, because obviously it's very difficult to kind of build the business case until we actually kind of have a sort of specific kind of feet on the ground, if that makes sense.
So we do have a volunteer advisory group, and that's a key element of their work. So it's pulled together residents and business and key stakeholders from a range of different walks of life and different expertise and experiences, and they're supported by Jan and a range of other LA officers with regards to supporting the work around that business case.
Some of the people on the advisory committee are head teachers who have a whole school approach to environmental education. So we've got some real pioneers in the secondary sector and the primary sector who take a whole school approach to the environment. You know, they are, if you like, the leaders, and their advocacy to their peer group will be crucial, won't they? So also we want to run a youth TEDx conferences and do podcasts from the peer, with the peer in the background. We want to generate some energy around it. And hopefully then we'd like to generate some money around it too. So that, you know, we know that so many businesses are engaged in this, and we'd like them to really see a tangible way in which they could invest in young people's futures. So, yeah.
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
That's very helpful. So just to drill down into that a little bit with you, Peter. So your anticipation is that some services will be offered for free particularly to the academies and education institutes in the borough, and others paid services. Are you building on something that Jan mentioned earlier, are you anticipating that will primarily come from within the borough and other council units making use of that? Or give us a bit of a flavour.
But I think so. It's looking at how we can bring in kind of work, as I said, through the industrial strategy and some of the partners that already exist there, and look at how we can utilise some of the kind of links, etc., that we've been building with key businesses, so that where there's opportunities to get schools and businesses together, looking at the kind of climate climate education agenda, then there's the potential to bring in some kind of traded income, as well as providing the kind of free work, etc., that we'd like to provide for schools.
So if I've understood that correctly, partnering with some of the businesses up at the White City development in particular?
Potentially, yeah. Obviously, location wise, we need to look at that very carefully, because it's obviously very much in the south of the borough. And there are other opportunities potentially in the north, which wouldn't necessarily relate to the pier. So we need to look at the whole thing kind of in its entirety. And that's precisely what the business case will do.
Fantastic.
So luckily we've got Imperial Wharf Tube Station as well, so it links from Shepherd's Bush directly up to that space. I can envisage that schools would come for the whole day, because, you know, that way they could plan that in and make more efficient use of the time. And so to learn more about the history of the Thames as well, and to learn more about the history of Hammersmith and Fulham. So linking it into a whole range of cross-curricular activities, but with that sort of environmental stamp on it.
Really helpful. And of course, fantastic that we can use a low carbon form of transport from different parts of the borough. Last question on the business case. Am I right in understanding from your earlier answer that you're still reviewing the staffing requirement for the pier?
So not necessarily the staffing requirement. I think that in terms of our work on climate education, the pier fits into the sort of the wider strategy. And we certainly have key members of our school improvement team that have the knowledge and expertise around working within climate, but also the expertise of running centres and that side of things. So with regards to that, not so much. I think the bit around the business case is more around the focus. What we want is a keen focus on the programmes that will run and the way in which we'll engage with businesses and that side of it. And that's more where the sort of content of the business case will come from. So not staffing as such, that's quite set, but it's more around the programmes and the nature of which they run and the marketing around the pier, that sort of thing.
So if I've understood your answer correctly, Georgina, you're anticipating that it will be primarily staffed by members of the team who are already funded within the council.
And then, of course, the school teachers themselves will be running the sessions, and also they can then employ some of our voluntary sectors that have got real expertise in this area, Hammersmith Community Gardeners Association and others. And there's some national players as well. It's huge, actually. It's a crowded field, almost too crowded. There are lots and lots of people, and you have to be careful about the quality and keeping the focus there. But yeah, I think that I'm hoping that we can generate some fundraising so that we can also subsidise and continue to support our schools in you know, engaging in environmental education and try and get to the 100% mark.
I think if you allow me to observe before opening questions, it sounds like a fantastic program that's been really deeply considered with a really developing but clear angles that you're hoping to empower people within the borough. So I thank you very much for taking the time to take us through it. Now, I know the members of the public have waited very patiently. Are there any questions on climate education, please?
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I'd just like to think about this a little bit differently. You've talked very much about climate education, and we've got to sort of think about why are we doing it. And there's sort of some other very important elements of that. You haven't talked, it's all to the cause of behavioural change, to make people live their lives differently and reduce their carbon footprint. You've also not talked about energy efficiency improvements. And I'm obviously of the school and its buildings and its, you know, outreach. I'm really, the question I'd like to know is, are you thinking through your whole school approach of how you can challenge that school to reduce its carbon emissions? And by that, I'm thinking of the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So it's those emissions that the school directly generates through its electricity and its power and everything. And it's also of the wider activities of the school, like if they go on a school trip, what form of transport do they take? How do they travel to school? Are they making their resources available to the wider community to, you know, maximize it? And I don't see that strategic thinking coming through. I think it's a fantastic incremental approach. All these things make a big positive difference, but we have to think of the big picture, and we have to think and understand and calculate what those carbon savings are. So how are you going to do that?
So we do have some very good case studies that we could highlight at another time, or even get the head teachers or other pupils to come and talk about it. So the schools that have taken a whole school approach, they have absolutely seriously looked at, you know, some of their carbon footprint, not all of it. They've looked at their recycling. They've looked at, one of the schools has changed their supplier of the blazers. The blazers are now made out of recycled material, and they've commissioned that right across the school. And this is a state school, and they don't have that much money, so they're monitoring that. And the students have set up eco councils and actually go to the senior leadership teams and hold them to account on some of their purchasing. So, you know, that's where it really works. And I agree with you. I think that this would be a very good way to, if you like, strengthen it strategically. And I think there will be some incentives coming from the Department for Education around this. But yeah, we need to map that out. I think we've got some departmental work, Hinesh, haven't we? I think, Hinesh, you work with some of our colleagues who are in charge, if you like, of school buildings, and you're looking at energy efficiency there.
I think, I mean, that sounds really encouraging. I think this is the moment, given all that fantastic groundwork and, you know, community that you generated, to think how you support the council in its 2030 objective, and how you get those schools motivated to be thinking in that mindset of carbon reduction.
And I certainly, I think you in terms of the groundwork is probably where we are. What we want to ensure is that we've got a really stable base to which to springboard from. And certainly when we think about working with other departments in terms of how we can have a sort of joint approach around some of the bigger issues, it's certainly something that's being considered as part of the forward plan. And certainly, as my colleague Jan alluded, there's certainly going to be some movement sort of nationally, I'm sure, that will also strengthen our hand with regards to where next as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Hi, your presentation was lovely, and your initiative sounds absolutely amazing. I can't wait to visit. However, I love what you're saying about growing food, and you're so quirky. You've come up with lots of lovely ideas. So yeah, I really want to come visit. However, where are you getting your education from on climate change? Because as I've mentioned, the military will have full control of the weather by 2025. So there's what emergency would there be? So I'm just wondering where you're getting your education from on that aspect.
If I can field this one, I think we're very fortunate that we have a group of extremely well qualified officers who support the council with greater experience than I could ever claim or knowledge on climate policy. I think nobody here is, however, I think nobody here is qualified to discuss on anything that the military is working on. But we can all see the value in, under any circumstances, educating our young people and members of the community in all aspects of environmental policy, no matter what the future holds. I'm sure you would agree.
Oh, absolutely, I'd agree. But we just need to make sure that they're getting the right information, don't we? I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if the military are going to have control of the weather by 2025, my question is, where are you getting your because it's very important that we get the right education. So my question is, where does your program get its education from?
So the key pieces of information come from the national curriculum, which is covered across the country. And then the other things is what Jan and Georgina were talking about before, which is around behavioural changes, for example. So obviously elements of the climate education kind of delivery around the way that you would travel to school, which obviously brings, by not using a car or not using a bus and kind of walking or going by a scooter or going by a bike, brings health benefits as well as potential changes to your carbon footprint and your emissions. So it's working with local residents to ensure that kind of the climate education is part of a positive way of living and the kind of changes to. So for example, the Summer in the City program, getting children to go along to the parks and use the parks more and kind of get closer to nature.
So what
and all of those sorts of elements.
About is that you might be getting the information that's telling everybody that they're going to die in by 2030, when in actual fact the military will have full control of the weather. I don't.
As I say, the national curriculum is quite well considered. I'm not necessarily the expert on it, but it covers off different opinions.
So would the chair know where the education comes from, where the education is coming from? The council advised. You've mentioned that the council may be are being advised by very intelligent minds.
Oh, I was just complimenting the officers that we have in front of us today as being extremely well qualified in all of their specialist fields. However, as we touched on earlier, I'd be very grateful if you were to share your insight and intelligence on this one.
I will do. Thank you.
Any further questions from the public? Lovely. Well, then I think please do.
Thanks. I think the pier looks very beautiful, but I'm on the trust of the London Corinthian Sailing Club, and maintenance, and all of you appreciate how expensive buildings are to maintain. And talking about environmental impact, the mention of the pier, I've had a look on the map, it's obviously further down from Fulham football ground. But there are sort of very strong rumours, well, it's fact, that Fulham football ground are trying to apply for, where they will be in the future, applying for planning permission to put a pier sort of 70 metres into the middle of the river, This will include a lot of concrete. It will have an impact on the leisure on the river. And there's currently an extremely good river bus that goes to Putney, and the football fans just need to walk 10 minutes to the football ground from that existing pier. So if they built another pier in the near future, then it would have a massive environmental impact and a massive carbon footprint. And also it would impact on the health of the football players, because they wouldn't get a 10-minute walk from Putney Pier to the football ground. So I just, I'm worried that how would you fund this beautiful building on the river? And is part of the sponsorship coming from Fulham Football Ground as some sort of
No, Jan,
carrot?
Jan, do you want to come in? Because the building's already there.
It's already
but-
built.
yeah.
It's been in existence for 10 years. It's a tiny little pier classroom glass box on the river, and you have a little plinth that walks across. It's nothing to do with.
Okay, so it's quite low maintenance.
And we don't have responsibility for maintaining it or paying for that.
Yeah, but it did trigger me to ask this Environment Committee about the massive environmental impact of building a pier on the river in this time of ecological emergency. And I would like to have that noted. Thank you.
Thanks for raising
Can
that.
Can I say one thing on that? I mean, may I, Chair?
Of course.
It's a completely different pier. But what I would say is I think the council are considering planning, but you know, when Fulham Reach Rowing Club opened, they opened with a new pier. And we haven't, you know, we gave planning permission for that, and it hasn't impacted the river. In fact, it's been a really positive thing. So sometimes there can be positives coming out of new buildings, like new piers. But yeah, it's a completely different pier, and the pier Jan's talking about is near Wandsworth Bridge.
Lovely. Well, unless there are any further questions, I'd like to thank first of all, thank very much to the members of the public for all of their thoughtful contributions today. Second, to thank the officers for generously giving up their time to take us through all those two very interesting reports, and finally to Councillor Harkle as well for making his time. Can I ask then that members of the committee note the report on climate education? Thank you very much. And then to bring us into the station, a reminder that our next meeting is scheduled for the 28th of January. And I look forward to seeing, 28th of March. 28th of January would be a very long time to wait. 28th of March. And I look forward to seeing many of our familiar faces there. Thank you.